They were the nightmare whispered about across firelit halls, the unhinged warriors who charged into battle with no armor, no fear, and no mercy. Eyes wild, weapons raised, howling like animals, the Berserkers. But what if we've been getting them wrong? Today, we're diving deep into the legacy of these Norse fighters, not just as mindless rage monsters, but as part of a sacred, ancient tradition that stretches far beyond Scandinavia. Because the more you look, the more it becomes clear. Berserkers weren't just fighters, they were symbols, ritual performers, maybe even echoes of something older, something Indo-European. Most people picture berserkers as lone maniacs, frothing at the mouth, swinging axe until they drop. But one of our richest sources, the saga of King Hrolf Kraki, tells a different story. In that tale, the berserkers are an elite unit, 12 warriors, handpicked by the king, returning from raids to sit at his right hand. They're not outcasts, they're champions. But here's where it gets weird. After these warriors return to court, they start hurling insults at everyone, even the king himself, and no one punishes them for it. Not even the king. Why? That's not something a ruler just tolerates, unless it means something. Researcher John Colarusso suggests this wasn't just arrogance, it was ritual, a performance, a way to display their status as something separate, beyond normal warriors, outside the rules, sacred chaos. And it turns out, that pattern isn't unique to Norse myth. Across Indo-European cultures, we find similar figures, lone warriors with divine rage, feared even by their allies. In Russian folklore, there's Igor Monomesh, called a single fighter. In Irish myth, Sue Chulin holds off entire armies alone, overwhelmed by battle frenzy. In Greek stories, we get heroes like Heracles or Ajax, separated from their comrades, fighting solo, possessed by madness or divine force. It's not just the fighting alone. There's a pattern of isolation, withdrawal, and rejection. Achilles refusing to fight in the Iliad, sulking in his tent while the Greeks get slaughtered. We usually call that pride, or even cowardice. But Colarusso suggests it might be a leftover from something much older. A sacred warrior type. One who removes himself from battle not because he's weak, but because he is too dangerous. And then, of course, there's the frenzy. The sacred fury. In Norse stories, berserkers enter a trance-like rage, but so do others. Cuchulain's face warps, one eye bulging out, the other retreating into his skull. Steam rises from his head. His body burns with divine heat. He has to be dunked into vats of cold water just to cool down. One of those vats shatters from the sheer intensity. He's not just fighting, he's transforming. Fire is a recurring image here, sacred heat that overwhelms the human frame. These aren't just men, they are divine weapons unleashed. And behind all of this, the gods. Berserkers were associated with Odin, the god of war, wisdom, madness, and death. Odin didn't fight like Thor. He didn't rely on brute strength. He used cunning, magic, and madness. And his chosen warriors, the Berserkers, reflected that. They weren't simply brave, they were possessed. And in other Indo-European cultures, similar divine associations show up again and again. So what does this all point to? Colarusso argues that the Berserker isn't just a Norse figure. He's part of a much older Indo-European tradition, an ancient cult of sacred warriors who existed outside the norm. Elite, isolated, dangerous, often appearing in groups of 12. Their job wasn't just to kill, it was to represent something, the thin boundary between man and God, order and chaos. Even the word berserker hints at this. It's often interpreted as bear shirt, and Colarusso finds an odd parallel in the Ramayana, an ancient Indian epic. In that story, warriors in Hanuman's army are called arksas, literally bears. But here's the catch. There are no bears in India south of the Himalayas, so why would an elite group of warriors be named after them? Maybe, Colarusso says, it's a linguistic fossil, a trace of a much older warrior cult, one that traveled across continents and centuries, shifting form but not essence. The more you dig, the more connections you find. Frenzied divine warriors, drawn to fire and madness, fighters who move alone or in tight, sacred bands, men touched by gods, sometimes feared by their own side, seen as both protectors and threats, the elite and the unstable. And then there's the uncomfortable modern connection. Colarusso makes a bold comparison. He says these sacred warrior traditions may still echo in today's world, in the radicalization of extremists, in terrorists who claim divine justification for violence. That frenzy, that divine madness, it's not just ancient myth. It's a recurring human pattern. He's not saying they're the same thing. He's not romanticizing violence, but he is pointing out a shared structure. Sacred warriors, set apart, given permission, sometimes even glory, for unleashing destruction. Over time, cultures changed, and those sacred warriors, they started to look disturbing. In later myths, you see heroes like Ajax losing control, going mad, killing animals in a frenzy, then falling on his sword in shame. The culture around him couldn't make sense of the Berserker anymore. The ritual was forgotten, but the rage remained. And now, it looked like madness. That's the legacy of the Berserker. Not just brute strength or reckless rage, but the shadow of an ancient idea, one that has echoed through Russian epics, Irish legends, Greek tragedies, Indian poetry, and Norse sagas. An idea that still lingers. The warrior who is more than human, and less. And for me, personally, this story has always struck a deep chord. I've been fascinated by berserkers for as long as I can remember. The name warrior shaman itself is something I chose to honor that legacy, because I don't think these warriors were just savages or monsters. I think they've been misunderstood, oversimplified. They stood at the crossroads between man and myth, ritual and reality, and I believe that deserves to be remembered. So next time you hear the word berserk, think twice. It might not mean mindless violence. It might mean sacred power, barely contained, ritual fury, the edge where man becomes monster, or maybe God. And that razor-thin edge, it's been part of us for a very, very long time.